On the phone, it's always a pleasure to welcome to the program Marcy Wheeler. She is the proprietor of EmptyWheel.net. Marcy, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Marcy, let's start with the most recent and work backwards in terms of. Well, let's put it this way. There seems to be just so many tentacles to this ongoing investigation. At this point, from your perspective, what seems to be, I don't know, the most dramatic, the most important thing that we've learned over the past several weeks?
I don't know if it's drama per se, but both Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort are getting more and more exposed, as is probably Roger Stone, although that's all happening at the grand jury. So we know that all of his closest associates have been dragged into the grand jury, or at least interviews with Mueller. So that seems to be where Mueller is focused on right now. But all these other parts of DOJ and the state of New York are now getting people to flip on Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. So it's sort of like this increasing drama before some kind of big reveal. But who knows what the reveal will be.
Right. I mean, it does. It does feel like there was a, I guess, a quality to this where Mueller started digging, and there was. I just have this sense of like where he was just like, we need. My God, we're going to need a bigger truck type of thing, or, we're going to need a bigger boat. And so let's start most recent to back. Yesterday it was reported, and maybe you have no thoughts on this, but you did mention the New York Attorney General's office, and this is the most recent move on their part. They reached a plea deal with this guy, Evgeny Friedman, who is a Russian immigrant known as the Taxi King, I guess. And he was Michael Cohen's partner, or I don't know what this means, passive client, or Michael Cohen was his passive client, according to him. And so there was a plea deal for his essential, I guess, tax evasion. What is this? Is this relevant in any way?
Yeah, it gets far less attention, but the SDNY, so the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, they're investigating Michael Cohen for at least two things. And what gets all the attention is the hush payment to Stormy Daniels and other women. But in fact, the tax deed medallion fraud was involved in that. So we know that what the Taxi King just pled guilty to in New York State, with the agreement that he would cooperate in both state and federal investigations, is one of the prongs of the investigation that the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan is investigating Cohen for, and is, about to start getting all of this information from the raid on his apartment. So, it's incredibly significant because that's gonna, they both sort of deny it, and they're both kind of looking around as if they don't know each other now. But every expectation, the Taxi King dude got a pretty sweet plea deal, because if he pays off the taxes he did not pay to New York State, then he's going to avoid jail time. And so to avoid jail time, he's obviously cooperating quite a bit, and the obvious person to cooperate against is Michael Cohen.
Right. I mean, it would be an amazing coincidence if Michael Cohen's partner got this plea deal to bring down someone else.
Yeah, bingo. Right. I mean, this was a great plea deal. So the general rule on plea deals is if you get a really great plea deal, if you're a big crook who's going to avoid prison time, then chances are good that they've got a bigger or more important crook in their eyesight.
And just remind us, in the context of a plea deal, it's not like we give you a plea deal and then it's like a potluck situation, right? It's you tell us what you got, and then we give you, we'll give you some deal, right? I mean, they know what they're trading here, right? In terms of prosecutors.
With almost always. I mean, there was one notable exception when Ari Fleischer got immunity in the Seder Libby case. But beyond that, right, I mean, generally as a prosecutor, you lock in what the person is going to tell you once they flip. And you do it, they get immunity for that. You sort of, it's queen for a day, king for a day. You pretend that you're not hearing what the person's saying, decide how much it's worth, carry out negotiations for what you're going to give in return, and the person flips. And so that process has gone on more than 3 times already in the Mueller office, and now we're seeing it at New York State. And importantly, remember, both Cohen and Manafort, and probably Jared Kushner, they're all being investigated for things that can be charged at both the state or the federal level. And so one of the significant parts of that plea deal yesterday is they said, well, he'll cooperate at state and federal, which means if this gets dumped down to the state, if Trump pardons Michael Cohen tomorrow, Michael Cohen's still on the hook in New York State.
Is what of the laws in New York State that provide for double jeopardy? I mean, my understanding is that before the whole Schneiderman implosion, he was lobbying New York State lawmakers to change these double jeopardy laws so that if there's a pardon, is that no longer in effect? I mean, what are the implications in terms of that relationship between federal and state, particularly in New York?
I'm not a total expert on this, but as I understand that pardon can only happen after jury selection has already started. So that, if the law doesn't change, and this was Schneiderman before he got ousted, and now we're going to hopefully have somebody far less susceptible to blackmail, right? But if a criminal case, so starting next week, the U.S. attorney in Manhattan is going to start getting the materials that they raided for Michael Cohen. But Trump can't prevent them from looking at it by pardoning Cohen, because if that happens, then they're going to dump it right down to New York State. So in other words, it helps Trump if the rules don't change, but it doesn't help him that much, just because what he's trying to prevent is Robert Mueller from learning all this stuff about him, and he could learn a great deal, and Michael Cohen could go broke, paying his lawyers between now and then, between such time as you'd start jury selection. Because remember, jury selection starts the day or the couple of days before trial.
Right. And, you mentioned that about Schneiderman. That never really occurred to me that it's obvious now that you say it, that this is a guy who was a walking sort of like, blackmail candidate. I would imagine there's a lot of people relieved who may have heard, bits and pieces of that type of stuff, who are glad that he is out and that is not an issue.
Right, because remember, Trump raised it in 2013. So Trump, because some of these people went to Michael Cohen to give him the dirt. So Trump has had this, or could have had this, over Schneiderman the whole time. And I find it significant that this plea deal, this taxi plea deal, happens after Schneiderman's gone. By all accounts, the woman who replaced him for this interim period is really great and really experienced. So, we might, on top of Schneiderman needing to go because he's terrible, his treatment of women is terrible, thus far, we're not any worse off and probably better off with who we've got at AG.
I don't want to go into sort of like too speculative territory, but do you think that was just luck?
Hard to say. It's hard. It's hard.
Right. Okay. It came up, and I don't want to go into territory where there's no, there's no reporting, and I don't want to go into conjecture. But it is an interest that, like if we were sitting at the bar, we would talk about that a little bit more, I would suppose.
Jane Mayer has made it very clear that the people that they reported on in the New Yorker are totally different than the people that Trump knew about. Doesn't mean that Trump didn't know about them as well, but certainly Mayer says their story came independent of that, given all of the other Me Too. So So we shouldn't assume that because she's a great reporter and we should trust her.
Okay. All right. Well, so moving, I guess, from the present backwards, Giuliani apparently in a HuffPost interview basically said that the release, and I know you've written about this in the context of what the sort of the conspiracy that the Republicans are trying to sort of construct. But Giuliani said that the notion of Trump's that the release of the Russian stolen emails constituted colluding with Russia. He said it's not, but if it isn't illegal. It's sort of like a gift, and you're not involved in the legality of getting it. Use that as an entry point into sort of what is being created with this whole FBI spy thing. And I know that in a couple of pieces you've written, there's an attempt or a I don't know if attempt is the word, but there's a habit of Republicans not contemplating the notion that stealing emails is illegal.
Well, let me also connect it to the negotiations about whether Trump will ever sit for an interview, because the last offer that Giuliani made Mueller, at least of course Giuliani is the only one leaking about this, and he's claiming things to the press which are patently false. But in CNN reporting yesterday, they said that they offered to sit for 2 hours and only talk about election stuff, but not about even transition, much less stuff that happened when Trump was president. And the problem with that, and the reason why Giuliani's claim that emails are cool so long as you didn't have any role in hacking it, is because, and I sort of think of this as a quid pro quo. In the June 9 meeting, you're offered dirt on Hillary, and you're given an ask, which is Magnitsky sanctions. Get rid of the Magnitsky sanctions. Within a week, those emails start coming out. Dirt in the form of emails from Hillary Clinton, which the campaign got offered back in April, start coming out. The issue is there's a quid pro quo, and the quo happens on December 29th when Mike Flynn says to Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, hold off on responding to Obama's sanctions, punishing you for tampering in our election. We're going to get to sanctions discussions next month when we get in charge. So in other words, if you cut off, and those conversations between Flynn and Kislyak were very closely managed from Mar-a-Lago, where Trump was. So there's a bunch of reasons to believe that Flynn, in that conversation with Kislyak, was doing exactly what Trump said. If that conversation is off limits for the meeting between Mueller and Trump, then what Trump has done, what Giuliani has done, is basically only make accessible the quid part, but not the quo part. They made accessible what the Russians, the gift, which Rudy is talking about generally, the gift that the Russians are offering, without making accessible to Mueller what Trump did or offered to do to pay off that help, to pay off that election help. So that's the logic. That's precisely why Rudy wants to limit the interview that way. And it matches up exactly with what Rudy's saying in public, which is that, we just want this narrative to be about what happened in the election because we didn't start paying off the Russians until after we got elected.
Right.
It really makes sense, right? As to the conspiracy theory, so there's this guy named Stephen Halper who apparently has served as a source for both the FBI and CIA. He's a lifelong Republican. This is a guy who's done his own dirty tricks in the Republican Party. He does have real credentials in foreign policy, but he's a Republican. And what it appears is that in May, when the FBI had concerns about Carter Page serving as an advisor for Donald Trump, they said, we need to figure out what Page is up to. And they asked him to meet Page. And so this guy, Stephen Halper, and Page had an ongoing conversation from July of 2016 until September of 2017. Importantly, that conversation precedes Christopher Steele, any DNC dossier. I mean, that precedes all of the stuff, all of the last stuff the Republicans were inventing conspiracy theories about. And there's a really good reason for it, because we know the FBI was really concerned about Carter Page in March 2016, and then Carter Page became a Donald Trump advisor, which added to their concerns. Now, that guy...
So let me just clarify something. So Carter Page was not an advisor in March of 2016?
He was named in March of 2016. So same month happens. FBI interviews Carter Page for their ongoing counterintelligence concerns. They believe he continues to have happy conversations with Russian intelligence. And then that same month is when he is named as one of Donald Trump's 5 foreign policy advisors.
So that must have set off even more red flags at that point.
Yeah, right. I mean, and it makes sense. And that's one of the things the Republicans are outraged that the FBI fought to investigate. And here's the other thing, Sam, is it's sort of nutty. In Page's case, of course, the FBI had interviewed back and forth, but they weren't, I believe they didn't think that they were getting honest answers from him. So it would make sense to send somebody to try and, cultivate his trust in the way that it sounds like Halper did. But so what happened later in September, the same dude, right, calls up George Papadopoulos and says, hey, I'm going to give you $3,000, do some research for me. And that's how he kind of got close to George Papadopoulos to ask him about why he didn't say this, right? He wasn't making his ties to the FBI clear, but asked him, George, you know about the emails in Russia, right? And Papadopoulos said, this is really interesting. Papadopoulos, according to the Daily Caller reporter who's been Chuck Ross, who's been, at the forefront of this story. According to Ross, Papadopoulos said, no, if I had anything to do with the emails in Russia, it would be treason. Which seems to me really damning, right? So
that's a very weird sort of like defensive thing to say. Like if you ask me,
he thought that's what,
right?
Yeah, maybe he thought that's what Halper wanted to say. But that means when Papadopoulos lied twice to the FBI in January and February of 2017, that's because he thought he was covering up treason. I mean, he was already on the record with an FBI source that if he did have a tie with the emails in Russia, it would be treason.
So that's his state of mind. And we should say that when Halper calls Papadopoulos in September, that's months after the FBI has heard from the Australian diplomat, right? That he had a drink with Papadopoulos, and Papadopoulos was talking about the emails. Is that right?
Right. So Papadopoulos learns about it in late April, again, before the DNC even knew about it. Papadopoulos learns about it in late April. He gets drunk on May 10th and tells the Australian ambassador about it. The Australians kind of sit on it for a while because they don't make much of it until in July. It looks like Papadopoulos has predicted what happened in July, right? So, but interestingly, and this is something the Republicans, the conspiracy theorists, want to hide, the Australian ambassador was told by Papadopoulos that the Russians intended to release those emails to help Donald Trump. So that's the point, is Papadopoulos knew in May and April stuff that happened in July, which is why in July the FBI opened up this investigation, and why in September one of their sources. And here's the other thing that just, it makes me crazy. I mean, we run in some kind of oppositional environments where from time to time you say, hey, that guy seems like he's not on the up and up, right? I have run into people that I have believed are informants before. When the FBI is allowed to use informants at a very, very low level, right? And one reason they are is because that dude is not law enforcement. So when George Papadopoulos lied to Stephen Halper in September 2016, he couldn't be charged for that.
Right.
He couldn't be charged for lying about what he knew about the emails until he continued to lie about the FBI in January and February of 2017. So the Republicans are all up in arms about the fact that the FBI used this guy who, again, lifelong Republican. It's not like we sent Chelsea Clinton in to quiz this guy. But it is actually a more gentle way. It is more deceitful, although, FBI sends undercover employees as well. It's more deceitful, sure, but it is also less risky for Papadopoulos for that approach than the other way. And there's also a lot of other good reasons about it, such as that there are, Russian spies involved, and you try not to let the Russian spies know what you know.
Right.